Just imagine the scene for a second. You've just lived through a massive earthquake. The ground shaking so hard you think it's literally the end of the world. You run to the harbor, to get out in the open, and you see the ocean pull back. The seabed is just exposed. And then it comes back with this unimaginable force. That was the absolute terror that gripped Lisbon on November 1st, 1755.
So we're talking about an event that did way more than just flatten a city. This was a catastrophe so huge, so utterly shocking that its aftershocks didn't just rattle the ground, they rattled the very foundations of how people thought in the 18th century. It sparked revolutions in science, in philosophy, and even in how we build our cities today. This is the wild story of how a single disaster in Portugal helped kickstart the modern world as we know it.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start in the rubble of that fallen city. Then we'll meet the guy with a radical plan to save it. We'll see how this disaster totally shook up the world's beliefs, how a brand new modern city rose from the ashes, and finally, we'll ask what this ghost quake from the past really means for Lisbon today.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's November 1st, 1755. That's All Saints' Day, a huge Catholic holiday. And Lisbon, it's one of the richest, most glamorous capitals in all of Europe, dripping with gold from Brazil. Its magnificent churches are packed to the rafters with worshippers. The streets are buzzing. Absolutely nobody had a clue that they were just minutes away from a total apocalypse.
This wasn't just one disaster. It was a triple whammy. First, at 9:40 in the morning, the ground just rips apart. A monster earthquake. We think now it was close to a magnitude 9.0 that shook the city for what must have felt like an eternity. We're talking 3 to 6 minutes of pure violent chaos. Palaces, churches, homes, all crumbling to dust. Then, about a half hour later, comes the tsunami. The people who ran to the harbor for safety could only watch in horror as the water was sucked out to sea and then roared back in a series of giant waves, some say up to 20 meters high, just swallowing the entire waterfront. And if that wasn't enough, fire. All those candles lit for the holiday, all the kitchen fires, they started a firestorm that burned for 5 days, finishing off whatever the quake and the waves had missed.
The human cost, it's just staggering. Some historians put the death toll in Lisbon alone as high as 90,000 people. Out of a population of around 250,000, that's like 1 out of every 3 people gone in a single morning. It was, without a doubt, one of the deadliest earthquakes in history. A whole generation just wiped out.
In the middle of all this chaos, when most people were thinking this was God's punishment, one man stepped up. And he didn't have prayers, he had a plan. This is where we meet Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, who you might know by his more famous title, the Marquês de Pombal.
When someone asked him what to do, standing there in the smoking ruins, Pombal's answer was incredibly practical. And for a deeply religious time, kind of shocking. He said, "Bury the dead and feed the living." That's it. In just 5 words, he basically said, we're not worried about divine will right now. This was the birth of modern, state-run disaster management.
And he did not waste a single second. His emergency plan was brilliant and totally ruthless. To stop diseases from spreading, he ordered the immediate mass burial of bodies, even loading them on barges and sinking them at sea, which was a huge deal for Catholics at the time. He set up field hospitals, he organized food distribution, he sent the army in to stop looting and had looters hanged on the spot. He even cracked down on doomsday prophets who were causing panic. And most amazing of all, while the city was still on fire, he was already drawing up plans to rebuild it from scratch.
But the impact of this earthquake went way beyond Portugal. It sent, these philosophical shockwaves all across Europe. It forced an entire continent to ask some really tough questions about God, about nature, and about humanity itself.
So, the big debate that erupted was this. Was this God punishing a sinful city, or was it just a natural thing that happened? I mean, for a lot of people, an earthquake destroying dozens of churches on a holy day, that was pretty clear proof that God was angry. But for the big thinkers of the Enlightenment, like Voltaire, it was proof that the world wasn't as perfect as they thought. He even wrote his most famous book, Candide, to make fun of that idea. Another philosopher, Rousseau, had a different take. He basically said, hey, maybe it's our fault. If we hadn't packed ourselves into these tall, rickety buildings, maybe it wouldn't have been so bad. This was a brand new idea, that our own choices make us vulnerable to disasters.
And here's where it gets really wild. The sheer power of this thing was global. The tsunami didn't just stop in Portugal. It raced across the Atlantic Ocean. It was recorded in the Caribbean, in Brazil,
It smashed into Morocco and killed another 10,000 people there. And get this, the effects were even felt in the lakes of Finland, creating these weird standing waves. A single shudder off the coast of Portugal literally made the whole planet wobble.
So this global catastrophe created a need for a new kind of knowledge. People wanted to understand what happened, based on evidence, not just faith. And that led directly to the birth of a whole new science, seismology, the study of earthquakes.
And guess who was leading this scientific charge? Yep, our guy, the Marquès de Pombal. In a move that was way ahead of his time, he created a survey, a questionnaire, and sent it to every single parish in the country. It asked all these data-driven questions. How long did the shaking last? Which way did the ground move? And my favorite, did animals act strangely before it happened? This was the world's first systematic effort to collect data on an earthquake. It was a foundational moment for science.
So, with the dead buried and the data collected, Pombal turned to his biggest project yet, rebuilding Lisbon. He didn't just see a pile of rubble. He saw a blank canvas. This wasn't just about putting things back. It was a chance to create something totally new, a city built for a new age of reason, order, and safety.
The crown jewel of this new city was a brilliant piece of engineering. In fact, if you go to Lisbon today and walk through the downtown Baixa neighborhood, you are walking through his legacy. It's called the Gaiola Pombalina, or the Pombaline Cage. Think of it like a flexible wooden skeleton built inside the stone walls of a building. The idea was that when an earthquake hits, the rigid stone might crack, but this internal frame is designed to sway and absorb the energy, to bend but not break. It was one of the very first examples of earthquake-resistant construction in the world.
Okay, so you've invented this amazing new anti-earthquake technology. Great, but how on earth do you test it? It's not like you can just order up another earthquake. Well, their solution was as simple as it was genius.
You heard that right? They built full-scale models of the Pombaline Cage, and then they had troops march in place around them to simulate the vibrations of an earthquake. Can you picture that? An entire regiment of soldiers just stomping in unison to see if the buildings would fall down? It's got to be the world's first seismic stress test, and it was powered by soldiers. It's just an amazing piece of trivia.
Pombal's new city was a masterpiece of modern design, built to survive the next big one. But here's the thing, the tectonic plates under the Atlantic that caused the whole disaster, they haven't gone anywhere. And now, over 260 years later, the threat to Lisbon is still very, very real. And that leads to a pretty sobering question. Could it happen again? And after all this time, is Lisbon really ready for it? Well, when you look at the numbers for the city's buildings, it's a bit worrying. Portugal's first real anti-seismic building codes didn't come into effect until 1958. That means a staggering 2/3 of the buildings in Lisbon today were built before those rules were in place. 2/3. Now, many have been updated, of course, but that underlying vulnerability is a huge concern. But maybe the biggest challenge isn't the buildings at all. Maybe it's psychological. After more than 2.5 centuries without a major disaster like that, the memory has just faded. For most people living in Lisbon, the 1755 earthquake is ancient history, not a clear and present danger. And when people don't feel the risk, it's really hard to get them to prepare for it.
And that's the ultimate paradox of this whole story, isn't it? The 1755 earthquake forced Lisbon to become a pioneer of modern thinking and resilient design. It became a city literally built to survive. But what happens when the memory of that disaster fades? Does the will to prepare fade right along with it? It's a question that haunts not just Lisbon, but every city that lives in the shadow of a past catastrophe.